That I was coming to visit you all, I cannot tell you how many messages I got. I got messages of people inviting me to their photography studios, to their restaurants, to their homes for dinner. And so this has been one of the warmest welcomes I've ever had going anywhere. And it means a lot to me. So thank you. Thank you. So today's presentation, I want to talk about something that I wish someone explained to me when I was first learning photography. Just out of curiosity, how many people out there at some point have seen me online? Okay, a bunch of people. If you've been following me for a long time, I've been teaching online for 7 or 8 years now. If you watch, I got a lot better. Not just a little bit better, but a lot better. And so what I want to talk about is the things that I think separate good photographers from great photographers. What is that difference? And so I actually studied photography in college. And when I was in college, I remember right around when I graduated, I had a breakdown. Like, it was very emotional. And the reason I was so emotional is I said, I understand lighting, and I understand posing, and I understand a bit of retouching, but I looked at my work, and it was not good. It wasn't anything impressive. And so I couldn't explain, even though I understood all of these elements, what I had to do to be better, to be great, or to be like the photographers that I so admired. And so I have a long list of all these different photographers who have influenced me, and when I looked at them, my work wasn't anywhere close. I've been shooting now with a business for more than half of my life. And if you want to do the math, so I started when I was 15, so you can approximate, okay? I started my business when I was 15. And so by the time I was through college, I had been shooting half of my life at that point. And so I'd been shooting for so many years, and I said, listen, I've been focusing so much on technique and the lighting and the posing and the retouching. What's missing? I don't want to be good, I want to be great. And so that's what my presentation is about today. I want to talk a little bit about my journey of being better and growing and what that looks like and the missing pieces that I think are important to take your work to the next level. Now, if any of you do want to see what I'm doing, how I'm trying to constantly get better, you can follow me on Instagram. That's where I update things the most, and that's a good way to see where my mind is at and the type of work I'm constantly creating. So the question that I want to ask, or that we have to ask ourselves, is how do I stand out? What can you do to not blend in with everyone else? Because quite honestly, I love Instagram. I'm a big Instagrammer, and when I scroll, I'm looking at thousands, sometimes 10,000 images in a single day. What is it about somebody's work that is scroll stopping? It makes me pause and actually want to look again. Because nowadays there's so many good images out there. If you didn't get someone to stop, then your image wasn't really even seen at all. So what is that going to be? And there's a lot of different approaches to that. And so what I've come to find and what I've come to discover is there tends to be 3 things that really help a photographer become memorable, stand out, get someone to take and invest interest in their work. So these 3 things, in my opinion, are concept. The image is more than just a pretty photo. It has a story. It's saying something different. The next part is style. When a photographer's work has common themes that weaves throughout it that holds it all together. When I look at one of my favorite photographers' work, I always know it was them. That's important. It helps you become memorable. And then the last part is impact. It's that intangible wow element. And that can be lighting, color, emotion, something that gets people to connect with your image more than just, okay, that was well lit, that was well composed. There's got to be something a little bit more. And so it's a combination of these 3 elements that I think take people from good to great. Now, I'm going to be talking a lot through this presentation. I have a lot to say. And if you do want notes on the class, this is where you can get a link for those notes. It's totally free. It's just a PDF that summarizes what we're talking about here. So I'm going to leave that up for a second if you want to take a photo of it or write it down. But I want to begin with my story for those of you who don't know my background. So I'm a fashion photographer. I've lived in New York now for the last 10 years, but as I said, I've been shooting for the last 18 years. And through this time, I have shot anything and everything, you name it. Because when I first started off in a small town in upstate New York. So people hear New York and they think New York City. Drive a couple hours and there's cows. All just like more cows than people, okay? So this is where I grew up. And in this small town, you can't be a fashion photographer, okay? And so what I did is I shot what most people do, which is everything. I shot babies and families and weddings and graduations and maternity, all of these different things. And when I look back at my work now, it's not bad, as in it's correctly exposed and the posing is nice and it's fine, but you would never, ever remember me, ever. And there's two reasons for this, really important reasons. Thing number one is I don't have a specialty. I don't have a niche. I don't have something that's true to me as a photographer. I was the everything photographer. No one remembers the everything photographer. They remember people that have one particular story or subject matter that they pour their heart into. I clearly didn't have that. And then the next thing that's missing is style. There's no common thread that weaves throughout this work. They're just decently lit and decently posed images. And so now, in New York, I shoot fashion editorials, I shoot ads for skincare brands and hair salons. That's the type of work that I'm producing today, but I have a unique lens through which I see the world. There's a particular way that I capture images. And there's something really important that I want to say about this way that I capture images. It's not right or wrong, or better or worse than anyone else. But it's different and it's mine, and that's what's important. If you try to make everyone happy, and you pick a kind of an average style, you just pick something that makes everyone happy, some people will like your work, but no one will love it. No one is going to fall in love with your work if it's all just okay. You need to do something more. And so I just want to show you, for those of you who haven't been following me for a long time, some comparisons of where I came from and where I am now. And so in the beginning, there was a lot wrong. Perhaps the hair light on the bald man was probably a poor choice. But there was no styling. There was no sense of color. There was no story. Posing a family separated like that, I still had to work on my technique, but I was missing all of the really important things in addition to that. And so now you can see in my work there's a lot more style and sense of unique perspective in which I see the world. This is an example of a couples shoot. These are both couples shoot. The picture on the left is a snapped photo. They show up, I take their picture, that's it. The picture on the right, I have conversation with my subjects. I come up with an idea, a concept, I tell a story, and I use my style. And the picture on the left was one of my first fashion images I ever took, and it's using the exact same gear as the picture on the right. The same modifiers, the same tools. In the picture on the left, it's not wrong, but it's not unique. There's nothing special about it. And so, I want to tell you how I got better. What helped me become a photographer with something to say. And I think growth is usually based on pain, unfortunately. It doesn't always have to be based on pain. But I just want to give you an example of rejection that I felt. So as I said, I began around when I was 15 with my business. And I was constantly going to conferences, and I was learning, and then I went to university, and I graduated university, and I was submitting to magazines trying to get my work published. And I had this editor write me back when I emailed him and said, yep, Lindsay, why don't you come in, and I'll review your portfolio. And so I just graduated college, and to me, this means my career is set. Like 2 weeks out of college, a magazine wants to meet with me, my career is going to go straight up. So I met with this guy, and I brought my portfolio. And it was a print portfolio, and I was living in London at the time. I had studied abroad, and I stayed there. And so I passed my portfolio to this guy, and he flipped through the whole thing, didn't say anything. And at the end, he closed it up, and he passed it back to me and goes, I would start again. And I was like, oh, do you want to look again? Here. And he was like, no, I don't think you should keep a single photo in your portfolio. I would start it again. This is after shooting for 8 years, and this is after investing a whole lot of money in college. And he told me every photo I'd ever taken I should get rid of. And he said, listen, I can tell you can pose and you can light, but who cares? You're not saying anything. I see 10 photographers a week. The second you leave, I forget you, so why would you waste my time? I will say I cried hysterically. I was very dramatic about it. It was in London, so it was raining and foggy, and so I'm holding my portfolio, walking down the street weeping, like it was very, very cinematic. And although this guy was a bad person, because he didn't have to be so mean, he wasn't wrong. He wasn't wrong in that if I just kept doing what I was doing with things that were correctly lit and correctly posed, you would never, ever remember my work, and I would have never have sought to develop a style, something unique to say. So sometimes honest critique can be the most painful thing, but if you have to be open to it, it can be the most important thing for growth. I think that creativity is a muscle. The more you work it, the stronger it gets. And so after meeting with this individual, I made myself shoot once a week, every single week. I shot on Sundays, once a week, where I had no bosses, no clients. The only goal was for me to develop a style, to develop a voice, try something new, experiment, not worry about if it didn't work out. And so when I had met with this guy, this was just shortly thereafter, and this was a model portfolio I had shot. Correctly exposed, decent poses, decently lit, nothing wrong there. But it's average, it's fine. Fast forward, this was 5 years later, and there's a photographer with a voice, a unique perspective on the world. And I had experimented and I had tried a lot of things that failed, but in that experience, I learned things that helped me to become a better photographer. And so again, for me, yes, it's creativity, but it's having concept and style and impact and regularly trying to put that into your work. To this day, as much as I travel, as much as I shoot, as much as I'm doing all of these different things, every single month, I have a minimum of 2 days where I shoot with no boss, no client. The whole goal is for me to experiment, to test, and to build my portfolio every single month. And so a lot of the times, the images that you guys will see on my Instagram or that I post were not necessarily client work, but they lead to client work. Because if I have a picture in my portfolio of a baby lit with a softbox on a black background, what are people going to hire me to shoot? Babies with softbox on black. Like they hire you to shoot what they see. But if I create bold, colorful, unique beauty imagery and market with that, those are the clients that are attracted to me. So I get paid to shoot the type of work that I would shoot for free and for fun. I just get paid a lot of money to do it. And I think that's the goal. But you can't do that on the back of paid work only. You have to grow your portfolio, have a style, have a voice, and constantly be creating with that in mind. So I've talked about style, but I really want to explain what that means. Style is those common threads that weave throughout a photographer's work. Typically, I find there are usually 3 to 5 words that describe a style. And the first one is usually subject matter. They photograph families, weddings, boudoir. They photograph, you name it. It could be anything. You have to find your specialty. What is that? But if you don't want to specialize that much, maybe you photograph relationships. And it's relationships between parents and families and spouses. Maybe that's your specialty. Now, the next one tends to be a little bit more visual. It's colorful, it's dark and mysterious, it's graphic, it's chaotic. There's something visual to it. And then the last part is emotional. It's upbeat, it's joyful, it's youthful, it's strong, it's aggressive. There's no right or wrong answer, but it's usually some combination of these. And if you think of your favorite photographers now, you can start to put together some combination of these words that describe their story and describe their style. And so I want to show you a couple examples. I'm going to use people that are closest to me. First one is one of my best friends who's a fine art photographer. If you know Brooke's work, when you see it, you know it's hers. That's the goal, to go from good to great. And so I asked her to describe her style. Now, when you look at her work, it's fine art, but it's always rooted in something surreal, something whimsical. It seems like it's out of a fairy tale. And it's very painterly, lots of painterly colors in her color palette. And then it's always a little bit creepy. Like, I tell her she's the weirdest normal person I know, or most normal weird person I know. I'm not sure which way it goes. But she always has something like a little bit dark about her work. If you go and follow her Instagram, you'll see exactly what I mean. And so when we look at Brooke's work, you clearly can instantly tell it's all created by the same artist. And if somebody wants a book cover, or they want an engagement shoot that looks like this, they hire her, not me. That doesn't mean she's better or worse, it just means she has a particular voice and a particular style. Another example of style, someone close to me, this is my boyfriend. I tell him he owes me because I give him lots of love everywhere. But I asked him to describe his work. Now, his work, he gets very different inspiration than me. He shoots portraiture. And when you look at his images, you never know if they're from the past or current. There's a sense of timelessness to them. Very dramatic, theatrical clothing, theatrical, dramatic lighting. And he gets a lot of inspiration from paintings, his color palette and his compositions. And so his work looks like this, and the best photo we ever took is the middle one. That's me. That was my birthday present one year. So now, to take a look at my work, in my imagery, it's very clean. I don't like to have a single pixel that's not intended to be there. Bold makeup, bold clothing, bold poses. It's fashion photography, very graphic compositions. And so all of these images were taken at totally different times, but they all have the same sensibility, the same eyes through which I see the world. Now, of course, I'm a fashion photographer. I'm sure there might be some of you who shoot fashion, but probably a lot more would shoot portraiture. I apply these same sensibilities, whether I shoot an athlete, an album cover, a fashion editorial, a maternity session. It's the way that I see the world. And so to give you an example of how I shoot portraits, this was a portrait of a professional ballerina for the Seattle Ballet. Clean, bold, graphic, colorful. This was done with one light, a softbox. I had the subject jump. I made the skirt out of scrap pieces of fabric. And then we took holy powder, H-O-L-I, like in the Indian festival where they throw it. And then we threw it when she jumped through the air. So it's still very stylistically mine. This was a maternity session that I shot. All this is a V-flat behind her, and then I took gold poster board, glued it onto the V-flats, and then photoshopped out the seams. But I don't think anyone else would shoot a maternity session like this. And it may not be something that attracts you, that's fine, because the people who want my style hire me for that style because no one else shoots like that. Or when I shoot a bridal image, I try to transport people into more of a fairy tale. And so there's a story, and there's a color palette, and there's a surrealness to it. So for my unique style, for my voice, again, it's not right or wrong. I wanted to tell you and show you a little bit about the things that excite me. I compare lighting and photography as sustenance, like as candy. Because when I take an image with beautiful lighting or beautiful color, it's delicious to me. It excites me. I really genuinely feel that way. So I wanted to share some of my love. So these are the things you'll see throughout my work. When you find something you love, you explore it deeper and deeper and deeper. So slices of light, controlled light, I love that. I don't usually use big, soft, broad light sources that spread everywhere. I use those slices of light to draw attention to the eye, the lip, the profile. And I do this for creative work, but I also use it for my commercial work when I'm photographing eyelashes and lipstick. And so because I shoot those things for my portfolio, I get hired to shoot them for clients, and they're things that I'm passionate about. I also love a nod to the past, so stylistically, I like when things have a little bit of a vintage look to them. I think it helps make them look and feel timeless, so that even if I'm creating stylized images, in 10 years, they won't look old. They won't look dated, and I want to create fresh imagery that'll last for a while. So I love things with that dash from the past. And you'll see these images are black and white. When I shoot black and white, I shoot clean, bold, and graphic. But when I shoot color, I shoot so much color. I love red on red. I love color, more color, as much color as you possibly can. I don't shoot subtle, subdued pastels. I shoot super saturated, rich colors that demand attention, and for me, help my images to be scroll stopping. And sometimes that is with the lighting and use of gels. Sometimes that's with the styling. Sometimes that's with the makeup. So if you follow me and you watch as I'm shooting and developing my portfolio and updating my Instagram, you will see all of these things together. You're going to see slices of light and color and little pieces from the past, whether it's the hair or the styling. It's all of these things over and over again. So I found the things that I'm passionate about visually, my unique style, and I explore them over and over and over again. And so the images that you just saw here, these are portfolio building images, but it doesn't make them any less valid, and this is what people hire me to do for this unique voice. And so you might look at this and think, well, maybe that style isn't applicable. I shoot album covers of people with that style, rappers and singers, or I shoot professional athletes with colored, bold gels and dramatic lighting, or I shoot lipstick or eyelashes. It's not about your style being applicable to everything, it's about being perfect for some things. Now, none of this happens by accident. So none of this is, okay, show up, I look at you, I come up with something and make a pretty image. Preparation is key. And so I wanted to show you what it looks like to put together one of my shoots, so kind of take a peek at the process beforehand. And what I do as a fashion photographer is we build something called mood boards. Mood boards, also known as vision boards, inspiration boards, they're a collection of images that express the direction of the shoot. So when I put together a mood board, there's something that shows the location, the lighting, the hair and makeup, the wardrobe. For my work, I'm not working alone. I work with other creatives, and so this is for me to communicate what I need from them. I work with a key team that I've developed over the last 10 years in New York that understands my vision, and they're very important to what my images look like. And so this is an actual mood board that I built for a magazine, and so this is showing them what I planned on producing for them. And so you see visually. If you know my style, you know the way I shoot, you can guess what those photos are going to look like. So if you picture it in your head, that is how I make sure when a client hires me, they know what they're going to get. That's the point of a mood board. By the way, this was shot in really, really early morning light. There was no strobes, no artificial light added to this scene. We woke up at 3:15 in the morning to drive out into the desert. But you can see that my mood board was a guide for this shoot. Here's another example of the mood board. It can also be a little bit more general. I wanted to do a story that was nudes, so browns on browns, nude tone on nude tone, and I presented this to my creative team. These are not my images. These are other people's images to show the direction I wanted the shoot to go, but this is what I came up with. And there's no way we could have shown up and come up with these. Everybody had to prepare. Everybody had to visualize what the shoot was going to be like. Again, for those of you who don't shoot fashion, here's an example. I was photographing a little girl for a portrait, and I always interview my portrait subjects. I actually regularly shoot portraits, and I figure out their visual goals or what they want to say about themselves. And so for this little girl's portrait, at that moment, her favorite movie was Grace. So I told the mom, okay, cool, we're gonna base on this theme. Go find an outfit like on the right. She can go online, she can research this. So it doesn't have to be that you are a stylist. I do have a stylist for my big fashion shoots, but you can scale these things down. And so this was the portrait that we did of the little girl. It's just something different than every other portrait of a little girl. It's not better or worse, it's just different. Let me show you an example of a family portrait. So this family, the mother is an artist, and in her artwork, a lot of her images look kind of Renaissance. And in their interview, when I was talking to them, their favorite TV show is Game of Thrones. So I decided And we decided together to do a Game of Thrones family portrait. And so, of course, I couldn't just show up and shoot this. So what we did is we sourced the clothes from a costume rental shop so that we could have something that fit the time period. And then not just any location would work. We found a museum that looked like a castle. So we contacted the museum to shoot there. And so I built this mood board together, planning out what the shoot would look like. And so they ended up getting a 60-inch print for their mantle. And this is what their Game of Thrones family portrait looked like. Thanks. Thanks. I'll take that. Now, I am not sure how many of you would want this family portrait, but it's not really the point because I would do something totally different for you. We'd figure out what best fits your family, what story you want to tell, what type of visuals work best for you. So I have a unique style, and I attract people who want my style. Just to give you an idea of what was real and what was in post, it was almost all real, but I did something with color grading. Color grading is like what they do in the movies. So a lot of times things start off with minimal contrast and minimal color, but you transform the scene by how you add the contrast and you change those colors. So that's done in Photoshop. So the next question that I get is, how do I come up with ideas? Now, when I do portraits, I get the ideas from my clients. I have a long interview that I give them, a questionnaire, that asks them, what are you passionate about? What are your hobbies? Favorite periods of time? Favorite literary characters? And I try to pull something out of them to tell a little bit of that story. It's not where your ideas are coming from, it's where you take them to. Everybody has a different creative process. So if you compare how Brooke comes up with ideas, how Chris comes up with ideas, how I come up with ideas, it's all totally different. For example, there's this movie called Terminal with Margot Robbie. Didn't do well with critical acclaim, but it is beautiful. And it's these gorgeous, rich colors. Everything is gels and slices of light. And I have so many images that I've taken inspired by that movie. But I've also gone to museums and seen a painting, been inspired by that painting, and done makeup inspired by that artist. So I think it's important to not get stuck in one place, but to be open to inspiration from so many different places. So I'm just going to give you an idea of where some of my inspiration has come from. First of all, we'll start off with wardrobe. As a fashion and beauty photographer, a lot of times I'll look at a piece of clothing, a headpiece, a dress, whatever it may be, and I try to figure out, why am I attracted to it? Why do I want to shoot it? And how would I shoot it in my style? And I actually think this is why having a style makes it easier. Because when I know how I shoot, it already fills in the blanks of how I'm going to shoot something. I can already say, well, I shoot clean, colorful, and graphic. So it answers it for me. So to give you an example, I had a stylist, a designer, reach out to me and say, I designed these crowns. Would you like to shoot them? And of course I wanted to shoot them, but how am I going to shoot them? Well, I looked at this and I said, well, of course, a queen wears a crown. But these crowns are different. They're strong, they're rich. I picture an African queen dripping in gold. And so that's how I photograph these headpieces. Clean, bold, graphic, in my own style. And I actually, based on these images, I shot another collection. And this is that gold room again, made out of nothing more than poster board and V-flats. Locations can also be inspired by. I had somebody offer me to shoot in a cave. And I said, well, who's in caves? Superheroes, right? Superhero go in caves. So I shot a fashion editorial with the model like a superhero. And this was lit with one light, a beauty dish on her face, and then behind her, a flashlight. And I used a long exposure, and we traced the outlines of her, and the fog in the cave made it look like she was a superhero. I also like themes, so when there's themes for magazines or competitions, that's why I think it's good to belong to photo organizations that push you to shoot and give you themes, because sometimes if you can shoot anything in the world, it's hard to know where to start. So for example, the image that I was inspired by is on the right, film noir. My interpretation was the image on the left. It was actually funny because someone messaged me this week that they got a tattoo of my photo. And so their whole arm is that picture on the left. It's kind of cool and kind of weird. Next one for inspiration, there was a magazine where the theme was psychology. So I based my shoot based on an ink blot test. And this is what I came up with. All this was a piece of cardboard, painted black and white, and mirrored over and over again in Photoshop using the darken blend mode. So I get inspired by locations, I get inspired by themes, I get inspired by clothing, but I also get inspired by hair and makeup. Of course, makeup is one of the things I get hired to shoot the most. And so I was inspired by the picture on the right. I loved the colors, and I tried to interpret how I would shoot it, which is the image on the left. Another thing that I love to do is go online and buy stuff that I can glue to people's faces. Like, there's so many different things. Now, just so you know, there is specific glue for gluing to people's faces. It's called spirit gum. But very key to this, in case you don't know, if you look at this, the picture on the thing on the left is the gum, the picture on the right is the remover. You have to buy both, and they don't come together. Just so you know, I figured this out the hard way. So I'll go online, and I'll buy things like lace and pressed flowers, and then I try to interpret it into a shoot. And so both of these images are me having fun gluing stuff to people's faces, and it's $15 US, $20 US, really inexpensive, but I try to create something unusual. So now a couple other places I get inspired by is Photoshop. I remember in the beginning I was taught that Photoshop was cheating, and Photoshop is how you'd save a bad image, and you should always capture it in camera. But I don't believe that at all anymore. A lot of times when I go into a shoot, I know how I will transform it in Photoshop. Sometimes it's for budget reasons. Like for this image, I was walking through Central Park. It was this time of year, and all of the flowers were dead and yellow, and I'm like, well, I can just Photoshop it. And so instead of buying hundreds of flowers sometimes, or building something, sometimes Photoshop opens up doors to things that wouldn't otherwise be possible. Now, I do regularly try to get inspired by other artists. Like I said, movies and paintings. There's this artist that I found online. The picture on the left is his painting. The picture on the right was my interpretation, inspired by him. So it looked like the model was dripping wet paint. Or you can go somebody not contemporary, go in the past. When I was in the Netherlands, I was in Mondrian's, this is the painter, I was in his hometown. And so I set out that I knew someday I wanted to create a beauty shoot inspired by his paintings. Or here's me being inspired by a photographer. He does like nude work, like you see on the left, and my image on the right was my interpretation. So just to give you an idea, these are all photographers that I'm inspired by. There's so many different ones, but I'm picking and choosing. Some I'm inspired by their posing, some their lighting, some their composition, some of their colors. And so it's no one artist, but it's a combination of all of these. And so I'm regularly looking at advertisements saying, ooh, I love this light. I'm going to take that piece of the equation. One photographer I love, this is one of my favorites. This is not my work. This is Lillian Bassman. She was in the 1950s and 1960s, and she created such experimental imagery. So I figure out what I love about her work, and I use it for my own. And so if you know where my inspiration comes from, you can see how I came up with those ideas. But here's the very important lesson. If you steal from one author, it's plagiarism. If you steal from many, it's research. So, it's very true though. So, I look as much as possible, movies and painters and photographers, so I can pick and choose. I think the problem people fall into is they get inspired by one person. And like many of us photographers, we look at some of the same educators over and over again. And so our work all ends up looking the same because we're looking to the same people for inspiration. So I encourage you to broaden your horizons and realize you can get inspiration from so many different places. Now, I want to end on excuses. I know when I give these presentations, people have a million different excuses of why they can't something. For example, people say, oh, I like your work, but I can't do that because I don't have designer clothing. Well, I just want to show you an example. Here, This beautiful avant-garde headpiece, really, really creative, graphic, fits my style. It's actually placemats that are spray painted. And then we used hairpins to put them together. And so that whole headpiece was somewhere around $25 US. Another example of that is this. I wanted to do a shoot with a really graphic dress and a big headpiece, and people say, well, I can't do that. I don't have access to those things, except for these things were made out of cardboard. It's more about how you think of these things. So this is 2 pieces of foam core and then one big one cut in a circle. Shooting in silhouette, you can't possibly see what it was made out of. And so I actually shot this with all natural light. In this space, I hung curtains, the curtain shears, behind her to give me a pure white background, and then we used cardboard to create her avant-garde headpieces. Another thing I hear all the time is, well, I don't have the same gear as you have. It is always, always, always a tool. It's not about the particular gear. And so just to give you an idea, these 3 photos were taken with totally different pieces of gear and totally different lights. One of them was taken with a cheap strobe, really inexpensive. One was taken with a cheap speed light, and one was taken with a professional strobe. And so you can take a guess, take a look, and what you think which one might be appropriate, which one you think is which. Okay, here's the answer. Okay, I don't know, some of you may have been able to guess, but for the most part, light is light. It's about how you use it. It's how you're able to make it tell your story and use it for your style. And here's the behind the scenes. They were actually done with totally different modifiers. Big umbrellas, medium-sized octoboxes. And so I think one of our biggest obstacles that any of us have from going from good to great is almost always the excuses we make ourselves. I think that's actually true of pretty much anything in life, is it's about those excuses. So my suggestion to you is that you shoot often. Take a look at your work now. Pick out your favorite photographs. The favorite ones you've ever taken. If I made you come up here right now and put 3 photos up on the screen, the ones that are truest to you, not necessarily the ones that did best on social media, the ones that speak the most to you, what are they and what do they have in common? What are the common threads? Common subject matter, common emotion, common color palette, visual themes, what holds them together? And this might give you an insight into what your style is. But you can't stop there. You have to shoot and shoot often. You keep that style in mind and shoot once, twice, 3 times a month where there is no boss, but you produce the type of work you'd like to get paid to do. That's the only way that you move forward, and that's the only way that you actually develop a style. So I try every single shoot to get better. Every single shoot that I ever do. And if not, it's the shoot after that. But every year for my portfolio, I try to completely get rid of as many images as I can to move on. So I'm regularly getting rid of 30, 40% of my portfolio with new images. What's great about that is then you learn to not become overly attached to work that's not that good. And so when you're able to start weeding these things out, that's when you see your portfolio change. And so my ability to try to let go of the images that weren't so good, constantly grow and constantly improve my portfolio, doesn't necessarily make me great, but I'm trying to move in that direction so I'm not just good, but I try to be great. And I'm always keeping in mind, when I shoot, that my images need to have a story and a concept. I want to have a style, a unique voice through which I see the world. And then lastly, I want them to have impact that stops you in your path. So they're scroll stopping, so I stand out from the crowd. So thank you, everybody, for inviting me this evening. Thanks.